Good morning, my fellow yoga travelers. I'm mighty glad to be alive today, and I hope that you are too as we continue to live, laugh, love, learn, linger, and live the life we love. All right, for my disappointing affirmation friends, let's start the day off right away for you. Have a panic attack. You've earned it. I should rest that issue right now. All right, journaling question for you today. Elevate the conversation or talk to me about it. Where are you as light as a feather, and where do you need to be light as a feather? Wrestle with that one, let me know, and see what kind of self-assessment you come up with. Now, my teacher says the body is not a machine which can be hammered into position in one day. You got to be into the discipline for the long haul. Anything that's worth working on in your life, developing or cultivating, it takes time. Parinama is called in yoga, transformations over time. So put in your time and keep going, or really simplify it, begin and continue. Now, my male mentors remind me that if your inner magician, your inner knower, your inner wise person is functioning well, it never leaves you in despair without a vision of hope. Because if you can't hold the truth in the face of negativity, in the face of the appearances of what's going on in the world, what's your faith and spirit really worth? So this is where taking time out to sit, to pause. I don't mean like pause, like dog pause. To pause, to take a moment out. You're better able to see your problems and unfurl the potentials of your own being. So if you want to monitor that which transpires behind that which appears, sit in silence and just watch what happens in the mind. Focus your glance, concentration to penetrate so you don't just stay on the surface, really important. I'd also say that although we all need a certain kind of affirmation from other people, your own expectations and opinions about yourself ought to take precedence over all others. So I hope you know what your self-worth is, and that gives you the strength and the gumption to do whatever you have to do. Of course, for this you came. All right, it's Thursdays, and I'll tell one of my favorite stories, especially for the new people who haven't been exposed to my teaching. This is one of my favorite ones that I picked up from Joseph Campbell, who really took it as a variation from Sri Ramakrishna. If you've never read the tales of Sri Ramakrishna, a saint from the Bengali area in the late 1800s, check it out. It's called The Tiger and the Sheep. Once there was a tiger who, in giving birth to her cub, she passed away. And the cub, being the kind of mammal that has that small window of imprinting, it wandered off looking for its mother figure. And it came upon a herd of sheep. And the sheep, being social animals and also knowing the difference between a full-grown tiger, their natural predator, and a baby cub with no teeth or claws, they took it in and they began to raise it as one of its own. So it grew up learning sheep ways. It gamboled about like a sheep, didn't have the hydrochloric acid in its stomach for this, but learned to eat grass. And I don't know how these things happen. I'm just a storyteller that even learned to go, ma, ma. One day it was enjoying its new life. I shouldn't say new life because it didn't have any other life to compare it to. A full-grown tiger on the prowl came upon this curious sight and thought to himself, what's that cub doing amongst the sheep? So it charges into the flock, and now the sheep, knowing the difference between the cub and the real tiger, they ran for their lives. But the cub stood there blinking, looking around, innately having no fear of its own, saying, where's everybody going? And the big tiger came up to it and said, what are you doing here? And the little cub looked up and went, ma. Oh, God. The tiger was mortified. It grabbed the cub by the scruff of its neck and brought it over to the local lake and said, look at yourself. You're like me. And now, for the first time, the tiger cub saw its own true face as reflected in nature. And it looked at its reflection, and it looked up at the tiger, and it looked at its reflection, and it looked up at the tiger. It had to admit, it looked more like the tiger than it did the sheep. Now, I don't know how these things happen, but you know how these things happen. Somewhere from deep inside came Tiger Roar 101. Ah! It freaked the cub out. Where did that come from? But secretly, it felt good. Then the big tiger took it back to its cave where there was a recently killed gazelle, grabbed a chunk of bloody meat and said, here, eat. And the little cub went, but I'm a vegetarian. The cub said, we'll have none of that. And the tiger just shoved the meat in his maw. And the commentary says he started to gag, as all do on true doctrine. But once its proper nourishment got into its system, once it started to feel what it could have been eating, should have been eating from day one, once it started to pulse in its own system, I don't know how these things happen, but you know how these things happen. Tiger Roar 102 came out. Ah! Ooh, that didn't feel freaky at all. Felt pretty good. Then the big tiger said, now come on, let's go into the forest and I'll show you how to hunt for tiger food. So the moral of the story is this: if there are any naysayers in your life, and it could be in any field, but I'm going to stick to yoga because that's the one I feel the most authentic with. Come home after your yoga class and the naysayers, the haters, the dream stealers, they say, yeah, so what'd you do in yoga class? You wrap your leg around your neck so you look like a pretzel? No, we didn't do that. Oh, but you had to like rock back and forth autistically chanting to the sound of your own om? No, we didn't do that either. But be honest with me. You had to gaze at your navel for an interminable amount of time, right? Oh. Well, did your teacher have anything to say about yoga? Oh, yeah, my teacher had something to say. Well, what did your teacher say? He said the purpose of practicing yoga was to discover your tiger face. I hope you all discover your own.